Welcome to this week's AZ Political Podcast. Our headlines: Vice President Kamala Harris visits the border at Douglas during a campaign visit to Arizona to discuss her immigration policy, which includes support for the bipartisan border security bill that Senate Republicans shot down earlier this year at the behest of Harris's opponent, former President Donald Trump. Headline number 2, I hope the saying, all politics are local, doesn't extend to political violence. But police were posted outside a Democratic Party campaign office in Tempe after it was shot at twice. Political violence has already reared its ugly head in national politics, with former President Donald Trump being the target of 2 different assassination attempts. And headline number 3, the Arizona Supreme Court ruled that Arizona voters affected by an error in the state's registration system will be allowed to vote a full ballot in our upcoming general election. This goes back to a 2005 law that requires voters provide documentation of citizenship to be eligible to vote in state and local elections, something an Arizona driver's license did starting in 1996, but that left some people who got a driver's license before 1996 but registered to vote in 2000 or after 2005 in limbo, which brings me to this week's guest on the AZ Political Podcast, Secretary of State Adrian Fontes. Good to have you on the podcast again. I think you have the sole ownership of being making a third appearance on this.
Yeah, I've been here 3 times, and it gets better and better every time.
It must have been pretty lousy to start with, is what you're saying.
No comment on that
one. We're having Adrian on because, we had him on Arizona's Morning News earlier this week, and he explained this way better than me. So you got asked to be a guest on the podcast. Did I kind of get it right?
Yeah, you kind of got it right. The real simple explanation is this. The Motor Vehicle Division did not give accurate information to the Voter Registration Division for a chunk of Arizona's voters.
Okay.
And because of that, those voters have been voting a full ballot while not meeting the legal standard that would only keep them voting a federal only ballot.
Right.
Okay. So this is at this time we're looking at about between 97 and 98,000 voters. We got into a friendly lawsuit with County Recorder Stephen Richer. He took the side in the law, just give them the Fed only ballot. We took give them the whole ballot because that's what they've been voting on. The Arizona Supreme Court agreed to take this on an emergency basis, give us a rule of law that we could go forward with. So these voters will remain full ballot voters because that's what the Supreme Court gave us as legal guidance. So it was a decision that I probably could have given an opinion on from my office, but I wanted to make sure to have finality, right? If I had given an opinion, we would have got sued and there would have been countersuits, blah, blah, blah. We just decided, hey, let's just go solve this problem. So we did. And we had some very interesting allies in that fight, too.
Yeah. Tell me about that.
Well, our good friends at the state Republican Party, including separately the Republican leadership in the legislature, President Warren Peterson and Speaker Ben Toma, have been adamant that if you do not show documented proof of citizenship, you should only be a Fed-only voter. You can't vote in Arizona's elections. Except when they found out that this group of voters, the biggest chunk of them were Republicans, and by making them Fed-only, it would have an impact in legislative races, it would have an impact in initiatives. Oh, Bo, they came over onto my side of this thing quick. They're like, whoa, no, we don't need documented proof of citizenship for these guys. So, their hypocrisy has been laid bare. For political expedience, they came over to our side. They're going to claim to be on the side of voters, which is fine. But, my counter is be on the side of voters all the time, not just when it has a political advantage for you. I was not going to get a political advantage. I'm an elected Democrat. There were far fewer Democrats on this list. So it would have actually benefited my side of the aisle politically taking the stance that they should have taken. But, things work out the way they do. And so we're glad for the voters, and we're glad that the National Voting Rights Act, which is the key piece of legislation here that took us over the edge, got us where we needed to go.
Will you be okay with all of this if there is no legislative fix going forward? If we just, are you okay with non-citizens voting in Arizona?
Well, that's not the point here, and I'm glad you asked that question that way. Arizona's documented proof of citizenship is an extreme standard in the United States of America. Every other voter from coast to coast, whether they're in Texas or California or Maine or Wyoming, they sign under penalty of perjury that they are a U.S. citizen.
Right.
Every other voter. And Arizonans do too. But Arizona took this extra step because of, I don't know, our xenophobia, because our love of excluding people from the voter rolls. I don't know why. But we have this extra thing that puts another burden on voters that says to vote in Arizona state races, you have to come in with documented proof of citizenship, which is, if you agree with that policy, that's fine. But then they never funded the MVD to do it right. They never gave them enough people to do it right.
Do you believe that's one of the reasons it ended up?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Look at all of the mess ups that we've had in state government over the years. 99% of them come because the legislature wants to put this extra burden on people, and then they won't fund the mechanism behind administering this, right? They don't fully fund our elections. That presidential preference election that we have every March of presidential years, the state government only pays for less than half of it. It's a mandate onto the counties. There's no county races on there. Right? I mean, so the state legislature, for all of their bluster about unfunded mandates, they're like the kings of putting unfunded mandates onto local governments, forcing local governments to do this, keeping them from doing that. So, sometimes their actions don't meet their words, but it is the law in Arizona. I took the opinion that these voters should be full ballot because of the federal law that says we can't make changes within 90 days of an election.
Right.
So I wanted to follow all of the law, but we needed the Supreme Court to step in. And
we need a
kudos to them.
legislative fix eventually, too.
I mean, I think we should remove the ridiculous burden that we have. That would be my fix. Yeah. Why do we have to add an extra burden onto U.S. citizens? And think about this for a second.
Well, what do you say to the argument, though, and I've heard this for years, is that it's not that big of a burden, and it's actually a suggestion that people, aren't eligible, aren't capable of getting a state ID, aren't capable of proving in some way, shape, or form.
Why add the burden in the first place? They never answered that question.
Right.
Why add the extra burden in the first place? Nobody else in the United States of America has this burden. No other state in the union requires documented proof of citizenship. Why?
And isn't it funny, though, that that's also used against us? Like
100%.
People are out there saying, you got people who aren't citizens who are voting in Arizona at these huge numbers, and actually we go that extra step.
It's silly. It's just flat silly. And it reflects this xenophobia based on lies. The lie is that there's a bunch of people who are non-citizens who are voting. That's never been proven true. There are vanishingly rare instances where someone who is not a citizen will try to register, and in very rare occasions they might vote, right? But if we are going to take an absolutist, zero tolerance across the board attitude, then we have to fund the mechanism that enforces this attitude, right? We have to make absolutely certain that the people who are sitting behind those counters doing that paperwork have the resources they need to do it right. Otherwise, shut up and let's just do it like everybody else in the country does it. Right. And it's frustrating to me because, look, I'm just here to enforce the law. Right. And I want to make sure that we're doing what the legislature tells us to do. I may disagree with it, which I do, but I'm going to try to enforce it. That being said, give me the resources to do the job. That's all I've been asking for since I became Secretary of State. We've got to fund these essential government activities instead of just shirking off the responsibility and say, oh, look, government doesn't work. Well, of course it doesn't work. Stop putting gas in your car and see how far you go. Right?
We are less than a month and a half away from the day we're supposed to vote, or the day that the ballots get counted.
The last day to vote.
Yeah, the last day to vote.
The last day to vote is November 5th.
What do you see, since this is behind us, what do you see as the biggest challenge for not just this Arizona Secretary of State's office, but all the county recorders, all the county boards of supervisors that are going to have to deal with over the next 40 or so days?
I think the biggest challenge we have is the biggest challenge that we have had, and that is elected officials that lie about our elections. Elected officials are leaders, and people listen to their leaders. We have politicians out there who continue to just whine and complain with zero facts behind them about the way elections are run in Arizona. We've got a guy down in Pinal County right now who is on the Board of Supervisors. He lost for sheriff in a primary or something, and he's threatening to sue his own taxpayers, his own voters in Pinal County, because he lost an election. Wah. I mean, come on. Right? You lost, bro. That's it. You win, you lose, you lose. But again, it's based on nothing. It's based on grievance and there's no facts behind it. And you can't tell me that all of the lawsuits and all of the lawyers and all of the potential ways and times and opportunities that some of these election deniers have had to bring something forward, nothing has come forward to show that there's something wrong with this election. What is wrong with Arizona, and what is wrong with Arizona's elections, is these conspiracy theorists who are in office and who continue to run for office based on nothing but grievance. And here's the worst part about it. It's bad for business. Would you want to invest in a state where people who don't understand the notion of facts are actually making laws? Would you want to invest millions of dollars and bring jobs into the Grand Canyon state when people are saying, oh yeah, those guys put the AZ in crazy? No, you're going to go somewhere else. So it's killing our competitiveness in the business community and with potential investors. That, to me, is the biggest problem here that nobody's really talking about.
Well, considering our housing crisis and all that, maybe we could have a few less people moving here for a while.
I don't know. I want more opportunities for our folks.
I'm just kidding. So what do you say to people who won their primary, may win the general election, who said this election's going to be rigged, and then they win?
This is the same thing I say to everybody else. Like, I feel like going back to that old Wendy's commercial, right? Where's the beef? Mm-hmm. We got another election denialist who's going to be coming into the state Senate probably.
Yeah.
Right? A guy that I ran against for Secretary of State. He was at January the 6th. He said he had a binder full of evidence that he was taking to his representatives on Capitol Hill to show the fraud. Right? Where's that binder? I want to see it. Just put it on the table. Put it in front of a special master. Better yet, take it in front of a judge.
You can say Mark Fincham, by the way. You don't have to.
I don't have to say his name. But what I do.
That's why he didn't say it.
But what I do have to do is this. I don't have to say his name, but I can call out his because it's the same that we're hearing from a whole bunch of these other people. Our problem is that we've given these folks so much oxygen and so much space. They're actually making money personally off of this stuff. Some of them, like the guy you just mentioned, have a C3 nonprofit organization who peddles these lies out to people in Kansas and South Dakota and is making money paying himself to continue the lies. And he's capitalizing on what he's making into a bad reputation for Arizona. Like, it's embarrassing. And, if the voters up there want him, fine. We'll deal with it. I will sit down with anybody to try to get the business of Arizona done. That doesn't mean I have to like him.
Or say his name, either. Let's talk about something else, which is actually a top 3 issue for Arizona voters. Number 1 for a lot of Arizona voters, and that's the border. Talk to me about Vice President Kamala Harris visiting the border in Arizona. I'll be honest with you, when I first heard that she was going to make an Arizona border visit, I assumed it would be where you grew up, in Santa Cruz County, because there's a Democratic sheriff there, David Harris.
Nogales.
I called him David Harris.
No, he's not David Harris.
Yeah. But anyway, she's not. She's going to Douglas, which a Border Patrol agent who grew up in Douglas tells me is probably the worst area on the entire U.S. border when it comes to cartel control as to who can and cannot cross there. In fact, this same Border Patrol agent had told me at one point that Secret Service that came down there for a presidential or a candidate's visit at one point told him, I can't secure this area. Like, I don't think it's safe to bring a public official to. Mm-hmm. Do you think that is going to change her mind in any way, shape, or form about what she sees there in Douglas? And if it does, is she alienating voters that were going to vote for her who don't see the border the way a lot of people in Arizona see the border? Well,
first and foremost, speaking as an elected Democrat now, not as the Secretary of State, what you've got here is someone who has dealt with transnational organized crime. You're talking because California is a border state, and when she was the Attorney General in California, they're task forces, in conjunction with federal and other local agencies, they did a lot of work on the border. And so she's no stranger to the notion of these transnational gangs, drug importation, human trafficking, things of this nature. She's prosecuted a lot of these kinds of things. And I think that's one thing that a lot of people just want to forget because it's inconvenient for their politics. The other thing I think is the big mistake that everybody makes about the border, however, is while we do have these problems, and I will not shirk away from them, a lot of people are missing out on the opportunities. Mexico is our biggest trading partner.
Oh, yeah.
We have an enormous amount of capacity and possibility. When we're talking about a very, very well-educated workforce, right? And we're talking about the explosion of the semiconductor industry and other tech right here in Arizona, and you talk about the folks just south of the border who are getting world-class education in these sorts of areas, a lot of the supply chain that's going to be coming through the new deep water port in Guaymas, Sonora, which is just south of the border, the Panamax, the highway that runs all the way through from Alaska down to Argentina, the internet superhighway that goes through there, all of these sorts of opportunities that happen back and forth over the border get shoved to the side, because it's easier to look at it as a problem and not as a complex space where there are also enormous opportunities.
Right.
That's the biggest issue for me is we can work through problems, but when we only look at the problems, we miss out on a lot of potential opportunities that could have a positive impact on those problems.
But do you think that we could have seen more of the positive, and we could have created more trade and, cross-border opportunities if we weren't dealing with the highest number of asylum seekers ever seen in our nation's history? And these aren't people who are going to go to work instantly in the semiconductor industry. They may end up in support industries, Of course. And everybody deserves a shot at the American dream. I'm not denying that. But it was the huge numbers of people who would just cross and give themselves up to Border Patrol, but also the people who, at such a welcoming time, ran away from the Border Patrol. Sure. I think most Americans feel like, listen, I'm all for immigration. I think I've told you before, I'm the son of an immigrant, right? Mm-hmm. But we want to know who's coming into the country. I think that's the biggest issue for people.
Well, and I don't disagree with that. Yeah. I think, but if we just want to know who's coming over, do we also want to allow for the possible economic boom that would come from allowing folks who want to do jobs over here to come over, do the jobs, and then go back?
Yeah.
Would we want to allow for some of that stuff? Now, there's a lot of folks in organized labor who would say, well, you're going to flood the market with cheap labor. So we've got that side of this discussion to deal with. We've got folks in the supply chain who'll be wondering about how or where things are going to be moving towards. So there's a whole bunch of facets to this. My biggest problem with the immigration issue, the border security question, is that we don't treat it like this sophisticated, multi-layered conundrum that it deserves.
Right.
We dumb it down and we say, people from elsewhere, bad. Right? People from somewhere else, crime, and then we have to stop. That's an unsophisticated view, and it's a childish way to look at things. Are we concerned with security? We have to be concerned with security. That's right. The job of our government, is to protect us, certainly. But just protecting us and not reaping the benefits of the amazing opportunities that exist here economically and so forth, it's really myopic, and it's an overly simplified view of what's actually happening here. That's where folks on both sides of the aisle have really capitalized on our headline culture and have forgotten there's a lot more paragraphs in this story, right? And leaders really need to start focusing there. So going back to your original question, what is the vice president going to see, and how is it going to shape the way she looks at things? I have no idea. I haven't been to Douglas in a long time, although I was in Sierra Vista not too long ago, just up the road. It's going to be interesting, but, we're in silly season already. Her campaign's going to spin it one way. The other campaign's going to spin it another way. It's going to get all spun up. And sadly, we're not going to get to a real substantive discussion about the potential benefits and solutions to the problems that we know exist.
As someone whose family has lived on the border since before it was a border, even, will we ever figure this out? Or do we have too many people on either side of the aisle that are just too dug in, and they just never can say, you know what, the other side, you're right about this, and you're right about that. We'll never have enough people on both sides saying that we'll ever get to anything where we are accepting of people from around the world, but also know who they are.
You know that's a really interesting question, and you have to ask yourself the same kind of question in an historic context, right? Mm-hmm. Have we ever been any different than protect who's here and shun the outsider? I mean, the Irish suffered it, the Italians suffered it, the Asians have suffered it for a long time. Being the other and coming to the United States of America has never been easy. Being brought to the United States of America in bondage certainly wasn't easy for multiple generations of some of our folks.
Right.
The idea of the United States, however, is an idea of an experiment. And it's an experiment with a bunch of little components. This component is one that I think we're going to continue to struggle with until we get rid of our inherent othering of others.
Yeah.
Right? When we get to the point where we can really embrace the notion behind the Statue of Liberty, when we can see ourselves the way the French saw us when they gifted us Lady Liberty, mm-hmm. and the grandeur and the poetry and the magnanimity, the welcoming generosity of that has only benefited this nation. I mean, we're the coolest country. And you know what? Ronald Reagan said it himself. He said, you can go to Japan and you can build a life there, learn Japanese, start a family. You can do it, but you will never become Japanese. You can go to Turkey. You will never become a Turk. But you can come from any corner of any corner of the world. You can come to America and you can become an American. It is a different thing. And I think we're stuck in some old world notions of what it means to be a person in this country.
Yeah.
And until we can embrace the idea of America fully, then we're going to still have this fight about someone from somewhere else.
I had no intention for this conversation to go this in-depth into this topic, but I really appreciate your thoughts on this. Thank you very much. I think you're just saying it because you want non-citizens to vote, which
we can disagree on that.
I'm kidding. Too. It's a joke. It's a joke. I'm just saying it before somebody else says it. Always appreciate your time, Secretary.
Happy
appreciate
to be here,
Jim. And thank you for joining us on the AZ Political Podcast. We'll see you next week.
Thanks for watching the AZ Political Podcast with Jim Sharpe. Click the box to watch more from KTAR News and tap the button in the middle to subscribe.